everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Outer Realm, the spin off show of The Outer Realm, which airs Wednesdays and Thursday evenings here on the United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 FM from the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM from beautiful New Orleans. Today, we welcome back Luke Eastwood, and you guys would remember him from being on the show. We spoke about Scotia, Lost Sister of Tutankhamun, which is his newest book. And you can go in on the show description if you miss it the first time, and you could purchase it right there from the provided link. And you can also go check out the archive, which was very well received, and it was a fantastic segment. Today, we're going to talk about another one of his I guess, areas of research, or, I mean, he's written books on this as well, which is Druids and Ancient Religions, which is one of my personal favorites because, I'm sure I was a Druid in my last life, pagan something, because I keep gravitating back to that. And, people just look at me like I go completely against the narrative, but I do. And hey, that's the way she goes. So without further ado, welcoming back our special guest, Luke Eastwood. Hello, how are you? Oh, microphone's muted. There we go. Nope. Yeah, you just have to. Yeah, there you go. Hey.
Hey, sorry. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah. No problem. Yeah. It was me first. Do now. Oh, how are you? Welcome back.
Yeah, it's great here. Very humid at the moment. We've had a real heat wave here in Ireland, and that sort of ended, but it's still very hot.
So, yeah, here as well. The humidity is, I think, the most difficult part.
Like the Florida Everglades or something like that. It's super humid and warm. But, I'm not going too much because we've had a great year,
No, absolutely. You're not wrong with all of that. So, I mean, since you've been on the show, you've been busy. You've co-written another book, I believe.
I contributed towards a new book, which I can show it to you here.
Please, yes, please. Irish folk tales. Yeah, Irish folk tales.
All right, yeah.
The anthology of Irish folk tales.
Volume 2. I have some stuff in volume 1, which came out years ago, I think, and this has just come out. It's published by the History Press, and it's really nice. It's got stories from all 32 counties of Ireland, and it's a hardback. So I just got that yesterday. Actually, it just arrived. So,
I love it. I love the cover. It reminds me of some of the old hardcovers that were had that sort of a. I mean, I guess we're just so used now to these like very elaborate computer printed and books. But when I look at a cover like that, it reminds me of of a book I grew up with, a nice hardcover with all of the etchings and so on and so forth. It looks very, very nice. Yeah, so hey, George. Sorry.
Angela Ainsley. I think she did the first edition as well, which is purple. It's a purple cover. I think she
beautiful
too. So I mean, she's obviously very talented. I mean,
it's beautiful.
It really is great. So
it is beautiful. It's also nice to see some of Ireland is so filled with incredible pieces of folklores and oral history, and I mean, I think we're going to talk a little bit about Druids today, which it is one of my favorite. When I saw on your website, just like you're quite versed in it, and I thought it's really not easy to find people who have a lot of information. I mean, they didn't really leave much of an oral history behind.
Bits and pieces, kind of, but not really in the way that you might hope for. There's no, like there's no like oral version of how to be a druid. Kind of that doesn't exist. What you do have is a lot of folklore, a lot of stories, a lot of like sayings, other things which are another sort of sayings, triads, and got sort of folk medicine and wisdom bits and pieces. So it's also rather fragmented. And you've got various traditions like called the Benfesser and the Shanachie, who's a storyteller. So you've got different areas of life, and like the fairy doctor that carried on through Irish history, which are kind of, you could say they're connected with the Druids, but all these different elements of what Druids did got sort of split up and scattered in different directions. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of stuff to be found in the oral history,
Mm-hmm.
but it's all kind of, it's a matter of like going around and picking up pieces of a jigsaw which are scattered all over the country instead of just finding it all in one place. It's all
Mm-hmm.
over. So
So,
yeah, very difficult to like put a complete picture together.
mm-hmm. So who
And
were they? Who essentially were the Druids?
well, people will give you different answers to that. You might get 100 answers off of
Mm-hmm.
academic or off modern druids about what is a druid, but essentially, really, they are a sort of ancient caste of priesthood that you find in Western Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and include Ireland, and that would include Britain uh, up to the Roman invasion,
Mm-hmm.
would include uh, France,
Mm-hmm.
even little bits of Germany and Spain as well. They
Mm-hmm.
would do,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe up into some places like the Netherlands as well.
So they
Although,
got around because most
yeah,
people would think that they were mostly part of the Celtic.
well, yeah, that's where these people tend to have settled. You
Yes.
know, uh, what's
Mm-hmm.
broadly termed Celtic is sort of like an umbrella term, doesn't really mean anything. You
Right.
actually had sort of like different ethnic groups and
Mm-hmm.
arriving at times in history as well in more than one wave. So
Mm-hmm.
without, you can't someone a name that's like 20 words long. You got to kind of find one word that will do the job that sort of encapsulates. So that's why people use that term
Mm-hmm.
as, because it's just too difficult to create a title that sort of encapsulates the complexities of what these different groups of people actually were.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yes.
broadly say that Druids were Celtic people or Proto-Celtic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a lot of people who think that, well, there's competing theories. People thinking that the Druids sort of spread from the Danube region, probably across into the Western Europe, and then there's a competing theory that the Druids originated in Ireland and spread east from Ireland. So we really don't know which is true. There's no way of actually proving either theory, really. You know.
Right. So what were they? I mean, I guess they were teachers. They were, religious leaders, advisors.
Mm.
It seems like through any history that I've read, and this is what you're here to do, I guess, is to fill in the blanks or correct correct anything that I've looked at. But essentially, the people looked to them, I guess, as leaders on different levels until hence Rome came into the picture. Would it be safe to say that?
Yeah. Well, you certainly, I think the early contact with Rome was via Cisalpine Gaul, which is like getting into Switzerland and Italy, and like southeastern France.
Mm,
That's really where the Romans would have first encountered them. And yeah, you're right. They were basically a very elite sort of class of people. They weren't like, you know, a kind of village priest, now like in some small village somewhere or a little tiny town where there's a Baptist minister who's very
mhm,
humble, maybe doesn't have a lot.
mhm,
They've been very kind of high class people. Um, you can't really say for sure exactly how it was in Gaul, but certainly in Ireland there was what's called a caste system. So you
mhm,
have everything from the slave right up to High King. And Druids were right at the top, but they were on the same level with the kings. In fact, they were the only people that were allowed to speak in advance of the king. If you
wow.
couldn't interrupt a king or speak in front of them, unless you were like a top druid, really. Anyone else, you might have been. I don't know what the punishment would have been for doing that if you were just some commoner, but you wouldn't have been permitted.
Mhm.
but these people were so important that they were allowed to do that. So obviously, they had a very religious function, and Julius Caesar wrote about their functions and what they did and how important they were in Gaulish society. And then I think there's mention of them later with some of the emperors that followed on. Um,
Mm.
I think it took quite some time to eliminate them from Gaul, especially, and then in Rome, in Roman Britain, they were kind of pretty much eliminated when there was a sort of siege of this island in Wales, what's now Wales, called Anglesey.
There's so
Uh,
many stories of St. Patrick even
they were
coming in
wiped
there and
out.
having like druid war, magic wars, and just like the folklore is crazy
Yeah,
when
well,
you
that was a bit later. That would be
right.
nearly 400 years after the Druids were eliminated from Britain, pretty much. Although the Romans didn't get very far in Scotland, so they would have failed there. But
Mm-hmm.
things are below Hadrian's Wall and
Mm.
across, into the borders of Wales and Cornwall, they managed to pretty much wipe out the Druids.
Mm.
Because they were, I suppose, a motivating force as well. They were responsible for justice and the sort of law,
Mm.
enforcement of law, and as well as sort of religious beliefs. So, although I think there would have been maybe more than one type of pagan religion, there probably could have been a more sort of like commoner, sort of more shamanic kind of spirituality for everyday people,
Mm.
you know, because the Druids were officiating for princes and kings and the equivalents of lords and ladies, and the top people to a large extent.
Not
Like
that easy to just push aside when you have people of that kind of status. I
yeah,
mean, like Merlin. I know Merlin is a title, but I mean, it was said that he was believed to have been a druid.
yeah. Well, there's two historical Merlins, it would appear,
Yeah.
and it's still very very vague. When I say historical mentions of around the
Mm.
time period just after, but
Mm-hmm.
really know anything about who this person was. The same with art. We really don't actually really know. We're just kind
Well,
of
they believed he was Roman.
guessing. Yeah, he
Yeah.
could well have been a Roman or
Mm.
maybe uh, a British Roman sort of
Mm-hmm. Mm.
fusion. There was intermarriage between some of the Roman families and the sort of Celtic tribes too.
Yes.
And, of course, they they all suffered under sort of the arrival of the invasion from Ireland and from Scotland and the Saxony and the Angles as well, Jutland. There was a kind of a sudden mass invasion all at once, which kind of destroyed Roman Britain. And then as the Saxons came in, they pushed the Welsh all across.
Mm.
And then, the Scottish people got moved further and further north, mostly by who then, of course, had a huge impact on Ireland as well. So
Mm.
the remnants of this Celtic culture got kind of pushed further and further to the less sort of habitable or less sort of agriculturally rich places. So,
Mm.
you know, Cornwall, you've got very much survival there, which is the far west, southern Britain, and
Mm.
then uh, to the west of this big river, the Severn, you've got the Welsh people, and then north of Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine Wall.
Mm.
They actually built two walls to keep the Picts and the Celts out because they were having such trouble, the Romans. They couldn't deal with the Scots at all. They weren't able for them.
The Scots.
Built the huge wall to keep them out, and the second wall after that.
Yeah, Scots just weren't having it.
Yeah,
It just, yeah.
yeah. A freezing cold country in winter, very windy. The growing season is very short in Scotland, so in
Yes.
you want to be a tough person to survive there. I mean, if you look at the cows, the Angus cattle, like they're pretty tough looking. The big hairy yokes
Oh,
with horns. You
the
don't look like
Highlanders.
mess. You don't mess with the Highland cattle.
No.
And that
No,
the
not at
people are
all.
tough too, or at least they had to be then. Maybe not so much now, but
Yes.
back in those times they were formidable. And even going into the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance period,
Hmm.
the Scottish mercenaries, the warriors, had still this awesome reputation for being extremely tough. They were quite sought after.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
need men come and like beef up your army. Where better place to go than Scotland? They were very tough.
They were. I think they still are. I remember being in Scotland and they were voting for something. We're not joining this, and they ended up didn't. They didn't. Like they were pretty hardcore about. I think joining
Well,
whatever it is at the time, the political stance at the time.
yeah, that
And it
could
was
have
just
been
like
Brexit or something. I'm not really sure now, but
wherever
uh,
it was, that it was like a nationwide thing. Usually you'll see communities. It's like across the country, everywhere I went. It's like,
yeah, I didn't
and then
get to. Although I was born in Scotland, but in order
yeah,
to have voted in that, I would have had to be resident for 3 months to then get my right to vote. But
yes,
it doesn't matter that I was actually born there, so
yes,
I didn't have any say in that whole Brexit thing.
that's
Uh,
what it was. Yeah, but apparently they got their way, so they're
yeah,
still hardcore.
yeah.
I guess,
Well,
united.
there's a huge uh, sort of cultural heritage between both Ireland and Scotland. You probably know
Mm-hmm.
that already, but you've got so much commonality between the sort of Druidic pagan
Mm-hmm.
that existed back then,
Mm-hmm.
because people were colonizing Scotland from Ireland going back probably, you know, more a couple of thousand years plus, ago.
Mm-hmm.
They going from one to the other, mostly from Ireland to Scotland at
A
that.
lot of similarities that
Yeah,
even Britain at the time
yeah,
didn't quite share, at least not on the same level.
yeah. And of course, there's a huge language similarity between Gaeilge, which is Irish, and Gaelic, which is the Scottish uh,
Yes,
version. And
yes.
even today, they're very, very similar. They're not exactly the same, but they're still very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, a lot of what we know about Druids from Ireland is all written as Gaeilge, which is written in Irish. So that's one of the reasons why it's taken so much longer, I think, for people to sort of discover this. The internet's changed that hugely, but back not even that long ago, outside of this country, I mean Ireland, I mean where I am, people didn't know very much about the Irish Druids or the Irish sort of ancient practices, the cosmology of Ireland, all this sort of ancient knowledge that actually did get written down, but it was all written down in Old Irish and then Middle Irish, and it wasn't translated into English or other languages for a very long time. And some of that's
Mm.
still ongoing. There's a huge amount of texts that still haven't been translated,
I
which is
imagine now with artificial intelligence that may help with some of these really old documents.
yeah, absolutely. It really could speed it up
Mm.
because ultimately the scholars can take a long time. I was talking to an academic who does translations. He written a
Mm.
book called Dara Smith, and he was saying sometimes they have like huge arguments that go on for like several weeks about a couple of words, and what it
Mm.
exactly means. And you
Mm-hmm.
know, getting some of
It's
these works translated fully can take a long time because they're niggling over small little things that aren't
well, it's
obvious.
apples and oranges. Translation is such a big thing. I mean, you just look at one when they translated, like the Bible, like the Red Sea and the Sea of Reeds. Theologians have
Mm.
bantered back and forth with that for a really long time, but it goes to show you just like a one little can change. It's
Yeah,
like a
one word
really, you know,
meaning entirely. So
yeah.
yeah, there's a lot to unpack. So I
Hmm.
mean, there is this false idea that we don't know anything about the Druids and it's all a mystery. That's just so not the case. But
Mm,
it does take a lot of digging to find all this stuff. I mean,
mm,
I've been in a library for 30 years now. Yeah, I started about 1995 was when I first started buying books on Druidism, and
Hmm.
a few books on magic before that. I was interested. I looked at like Kabbalah and things like that while I was at university. And when I
Hmm.
kind of cross of the Druid stuff,
Hmm.
I, oh, this looks really, up my street, the kind of thing that I'd really like to know more about. But you can find texts on Hermeticism and things like that a lot more easily than you can find actually anything really useful on Druids. It takes a lot of work and digging. You nearly
And
have
then you have to connect the dots, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of scholars and writers now who've been attempting to join the dots for other people,
Hmm.
and I like to think I've contributed something towards that. But I mean,
Hmm.
there's loads of other people, people who came before and still here now who have sort of made massive contribution to sort of bringing a lot of this obscure information forward so it can actually be used. But I
I
mean,
think
knowledge is no good if it just sits there in a vault that no one ever has access to. It's pointless, isn't it? Really, I
it
think.
is. It is. And I think it's also a matter of, separating the fact from the fiction or the hypothetical. And I'll make mention of one, and I'm anxious to hear your thoughts on it, is the Druid mythology, connecting them to the Fae, and that they had all these, supernatural, mystical powers, and that they were versed in magic and things of that, or what we would consider to be magical today. Maybe it was just a matter that they were aware with some medicine or how to do things that, it's like you would consider this a miracle back in the day, but today you might go, oh no, this is just, we just gave him some of this plant. And lo and behold, he recovered, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, there's some interesting stories connected with that in Irish mythology about the knowledge of herbs and how that all got scattered. You know, I won't tell you the story, but it relates to the people called the Tuatha De Danann, which are often equated with fairies, or often referred to as the good people, or Elshi is the Irish word for them, I guess. Um,
Mm.
I think is means good people. That's
Hmm.
another name. So, um, in reality, they probably were um, a group of very, very talented people. Maybe they were early Bronze Age people who arrived into an island that was still in the megalithic period and brought all this metallic knowledge, metalworking, bronze, gold, blah, blah,
Would
and
make a lot of sense.
all kinds of advanced tech for its time. It could be simply a case of that. And so it became magical as
Yeah.
opposed to advanced. I this is my speculation. I'm not saying this is
Well, I
actually.
think it's all in the wording. Absolutely. It's all in the wording, of this is what I mean as well. Those who were, where were the witnesses?
Mm,
Because the Druids themselves may have had complicated documentation or oral history, but then you have those who witnessed this. And back then, I mean, how many people actually knew how to even write? So you're getting into more oral history,
yeah.
or imagery, uh, but the story, it's like catching the fish that's this big. And by the time you finish telling the story, it's this
It's
big.
dark.
It's you know, exactly. So separating fact from fiction.
that is
Wayne,
that is a weakness of oral tradition, is that Chinese whispers thing can happen. But it's also, if you have enough people to know a story, then it's got tremendous strength to be passed down. And
yes.
people do want to tell it faithfully. It's just that, unfortunately, sometimes people do make embellishments. Like going back to the Tuatha De Danann, they're this mythical race, and in that I think they existed. They must have existed. They arrived here in Ireland. Different speculations about when. Some people like 2000-ish BC, and some
Mm.
people later, like 1500 or so, or roughly. And then the next wave of people was the Malaysians, who Scotia came, and they had this huge war that went on quite some time, and the Tuatha De Danann were experts in magic seemingly, although ultimately this druid called Emergin sort of outdid them in terms of magical ability, and an alliance with the goddesses of Ireland that enabled them to come and over. So part of the mythology is that the Tuatha De Danann, by agreement, went below ground and they owned Ireland beneath the soil, and the Malaysians owned Ireland above the soil. So that's why you get this thing about burial mounds and fairy forts and all this into the Tuatha De Danann, that these people went underground and entered into the fairy realm, into sort of Tír na nÓg, and there's various other names as well for the same place. But I think it's more metaphorical than literal. I think there's been spirits that live in the land. In fact, all over the world, you've got the same phenomenon in different cultures, where you have invisible spirits which are part of the land, and they have become acquainted with these people somehow. Although I think they would have been there always. They didn't arrive in on boats from another place. They were in the land and were always here since time immemorial. But I think something's happened where these people, the Tuatha De Danann, have got connected with fairies somehow, and
a huge belief in them. I mean, they're all over the world. Too many sightings, too many similarities with people who have not traversed from one side to the other.
Well, once you've experienced it, I mean, a lot of people don't believe it, but then, there's ridiculous Victorian idea you were saying about misconceptions. A lot of those ideas come from I think this Victorian, or was it early Edwardian photographs, which were all fakes, which were these tiny little winged people. They were actually cut out and photographed, and just very cleverly photographed out, and people thought, oh wow, real proof of fairies, amazing. But fairies come in all different sizes, and they're not all like Tinkerbell. They're not all cute.
Even Tinkerbell was hostile. Never mind.
Yeah, well, yeah. Oh, well.
She meant business, that one.
Yeah, that was kind of jealousy, though, as opposed to pure desire to harm people. And of course, there are good and bad fairies. They are hostile, genuinely hostile, and those that are maybe agreeable, and then those which are ambivalent in that they could be either, depending on how you behave towards them. So, and it isn't just in Ireland. This is everywhere around the world. You get these legends and this belief in the unseen. But I suppose we've been almost trained not to believe it, trained to not see is beyond sort of everyday vision, and not to trust our instinct, trust our intuition, and science. I mean, science is brilliant. The Druids of their time were scientists. They were certainly believed in exploration of knowledge and developing. So I mean, science is really valuable, important, but
it has its place, but so does the science of
spirituality that sort of science can't really explain or tap into.
No, I am a believer, as a seer, as an experiencer of many things. I definitely do believe in the ethereal world, or all of the different dimensional stuff, and it's nice to see science catching up. Oh, we do believe that the essence goes on after physical death. No, you're kidding. Because a lot of us, we know this. I think our spirituality tells us this. Others, have. I look at a child who's got recollection of another life, and takes you right. There's no way when you're like 3 years old, 4 years old, and they're taking people to where they were buried and describe a life, and then they go and see the people that the person was married to, and they're like, yes, that's exactly what this person was like. There's got to be something to that, So for me, and all these ancient cultures, especially from where you're from, I think a lot originated there with the Fae. Being in Scotland and seeing the fairy circles, and then you see them in different parts of the world, and you're kind of like, these are all people who have not had contact with one another. but everything has similarities.
Well, you mentioned about reincarnation and these people. I mean, that's something. Metempsychosis is the name for it. I think in the Greeks used, but there's certainly the Gaulish Druids and would have believed in that, and there's some of the mythology would lend itself to belief in that, like the story of the Salmon of Knowledge of Finkel, which alludes to that in itself, although it's kind of cryptic in how it's described. So I think they very much did believe. And I've seen some unbelievable accounts of a little boy who remembered being in the World War II on I think an American carrier as a pilot in action in Japan, and he's like years old, and he describes everything perfectly. He actually met the widow of the person who he was in the previous life, and he knew everything about him, her husband, and she was just so stunned. And there's an interesting documentary about that. This guy's like, there's no way he could have made all this up. He just remembered his life. In fact, he was quite traumatized.
You have to pay attention to that, right?
Like
there's something to
he remembered his death in the plane crashing, and it was just like the most striking, most incredible confirmation of reincarnation I've ever seen. That story was just absolutely stunning, and
it's all information we're supposed. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I would ask. I don't think any scientist could dismiss this particular case. It just couldn't, and people were just like, "It's unbelievable. I can't explain it." They didn't even try really to dismiss it. They just said they just can't explain it, and they had no answers really. And I think there are scientists now who are actually trying to measure these things, ESP and such like, psychic abilities, which of course have been around forever, and people in the just accepted it as normal, whereas now it's sort of like a fight to reestablish its acceptance. A lot has been happening, partly down to science and partly down to sort of some of the major religions have sort of discouraged people from using
conditioning.
Talents, God-given talent for them, whereas they might say it's evil and it's the work of the devil or whatever.
We're supposed to remember who we are, where we come from, because a lot of memory sits with the essence, not so much just with the physical. It's funny because Wayne in chat has a friend, and when he was 5 years old, he could describe like everything about a Spitfire, how it worked, how you put it together, how it flew, how it did everything. You're 5. It's like, how do you know this? It was just way too complicated. It's just like the stuff we knew is not something a kid would know. Being like in England, right? So, and he just, oh no, I remember this, and this, and I was 5. My parents would just be just like, what? So, it is. It's fantastic. It really is. But we have been dumbed down, I think. As Wayne says, from childhood's, schooling, spiritual teachings, everything. And I think it's just has been instilled into us to the point where we question what we see, which is good. It's good to question what you see by all means, but don't just discount it so easily, because there are so many other things that we share space with.
Yeah, I think we all have latent abilities. I mean, not every single person on the planet has had a past life. I think there are new, but I think most people have been here more than once, and some here many, many times.
And some of us can't get it right, Luke.
We
just keep firing us back out the chute.
Yeah.
Here we are. Yeah. No. I like to think I'm here to enlighten people.
I guess we don't like to think we can do that, and hopefully we can. But there is a bit of a sea change, and people's attitudes are changing, and beginning to sort of think that maybe we should be allowed to explore what other God-given talents, for want of a better word, we all have. I think it's latent in everybody. Most children are born with a certain amount of ESP, or if for want of a better word,
Mm-hmm.
and intuitive abilities, which are often like sort of just knocked out of them one way or another. And uh, instead of doing that, I think they should be encouraged and developed, not suppressed,
Mm.
because they're part of human life and they're part of our our talents and our ability to sort of live in the world. It is something useful. Like having eyesight is incredibly useful. So is like having like uh, intuition or foresight, very useful too.
Mm-hmm.
And we should use these abilities. I don't believe this idea that if there's a God and God say gave us the ability to sort of intuitively know things, that somehow that's evil. It's like saying like God gave us eyes and a nose, but it was the devil that gave us ears. It doesn't make sense.
No,
We
no.
created God's image, and we are sort of divinely inspired beings. Then why would be given talents and abilities that are
I,
just
I I agree. It's believed that we were given everything we would need to exist here,
yeah,
and that the planet itself gives us everything we need to exist here.
yeah,
But I think it's mankind that, through different avenues of putting things in the food, maybe doing a little bit of this with a little bit too much stuff, that just from the time that we're young, to kind of dumb this up, the
yeah, blocking your third
the
eye.
intuition. Yeah, exactly. So when you start looking into all of that over many years, when by the time you're 50 years old, if you're this is a type of stuff that's in the
Yeah,
environment or that's in your food, then after a while, mission accomplished. Some people are
yeah,
able to retain it, but I think with children, they haven't had time yet for conditioning, or they haven't had time yet for that lifetime of dumbing down. So they're very pure. And they'll not, they can weave a good tale. So you know how to watch how you try to retrieve that information, because they'll definitely take you down a good road. I have a grandson who's just like, oh wow. It's like, okay, but he's very intuitive. I often see him looking behind me going, who's that? I was like, oh boy. But
yeah,
you know they can see, and I think we
yeah,
as adults have to give them that credit and not discourage them
yeah,
with.
absolutely. And you know, these things, these abilities, they are not good or evil, neither. They are just what we have and can develop.
Mm,
Ultimately, it's our choices that make us good or evil. I, that we can do is basically a tool. We've got tools to be either creative or destructive, good or bad. Like, a kitchen knife is a brilliant tool for a chef, and they can make a wonderful dinner, but someone else can use that to stab somebody and kill people. So it's not the tools themselves, the abilities we might have aren't they're not evil. It's what you choose to do with them. And I think all the
intention.
books are all these religious books. Ultimately, the message is about we have free will, we have a choice, we can choose a righteous path
Hmm.
towards holiness and ascension, sort of trying to evolve spiritually, or we can just choose the other way and go down and just be selfish and cruel and evil and destructive. And really, literally, a binary choice that we will have to make every day. And sometimes we get things a bit wrong, but I would hope that we all, are trying to move towards being better people, um,
Hmm.
rather than just being self-serving and selfish and not caring about anything else. So, I mean, that's really what it's about. It's not about different things you
So
can do. It's how you use what given in this life. You know,
do you think that, because the idea, yeah, it's
you still there?
evolution. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay. You freeze up every now and then, so I don't mean to interrupt you. I just kind of catch you as you're freezing. So, um, do you think we've gone backwards in our evolution?
Absolutely, yeah. In some way, yeah. I think in our technological evolution, we have certainly gone forward. I mean, who's to say where we were 12,000 plus years ago before the flood? We may have been more advanced then than we are now, but um, certainly in recorded history, we've gone backwards. We've gone up and down, mostly due to wars and conflicts. Where you think about ancient peoples that had really sophisticated tech, that they could do like copper and gold plating. They had underfloor heating. They had sanitation. And then in the Middle Ages, you got people literally crapping out of a hole in the ceiling and throwing it in buckets on people walking past, and rats everywhere, and just living in filth and squalor, and disease rampant. Yeah, we've definitely gone backwards. And like here now on a spiritual, I think we've gone backwards, not in just a literal sense of, the technology's gone up and down centuries and millennia, but like spiritually, I think we've been sort of almost infantilized to a large extent by big institutions, and we've become dependent, this sort of codependent relationship where this big organization needs us, it needs our money, and then we treat them like sort of this parent, and we're just little babies that have to do as we're told. Whereas really, I think we should be towards having an individual relationship with whatever we think God is, whether that's male, female, or neither, or multiple forms of one God, or just one source, if you like. I think it's all kind of irrelevant what the kind of parameters are about what God is. I think it's that relationship that's important. Of
But it comes from
actually
within
trying to
as
do,
well,
yeah,
right?
trying to do something good. In what's the point in being alive if all you're going to do is wreck everything? Shouldn't we be here to like make the world a bit better? And for, future generations would thank us for actually trying to make the world better, not having like a end of the world party and smash everything up. Is that that's so infant and childish? We should trying to make this planet is so amazing and beautiful and should be a paradise, but we've actually through our own selfishness kind of wrecked it to a large extent. And I think we're like close to the point of annihilating ourselves, through wars and famine, and pollution, etc. But we have this capacity within us to actually be something um, angelic, really, something amazing. If we could only reach for the highest heights instead of being destructive and sort of self-defeating, which happens so much with humans.
Mm. I think that, we have to look at the fact that this is a really wondrous place. And when you look at the creator created a wondrous place. And I think people tend to forget that you have to look within to find that knowledge. You're not going to find it outside of yourself. If you look at many of the ancients, everything was nature based. A lot of our indigenous people and native people from around the world, they're still connected to nature. That
Yeah,
many
that's
have tried to condition them and take that away from them, but is that the key
yeah.
to?
Well, I wrote this book. Sorry to plug my book again, but this book here,
That's
which
okay.
is called
Right
which
there.
is
Yeah.
this is all about living with nature, about getting back to actually living with the soil, living with the land, living with living organisms instead of just plundering it and taking it and destroying it. And
Mhm.
I, at the beginning of it, I tell like the history of gardening from the very beginnings to, and it's a real sad story because it's a story of like degradation and going from like being connected to destruction and just basically wrecking the planet for money, and
Mm.
just making rubbish food now, and polluting everything, poisoning things, trying to even adulterate nature to the point that it's like not even real plants anymore, and animals too. They've just been messed with. Um, in a way that they don't know that it's even safe to do it. And
Well,
we have to
frequency.
go back. We have to get back to being in harmony with nature, not trying to rule nature, because I think the earth will destroy us if we keep down this path of like this sort of, I suppose, transhumanist way of thinking. And we are superhuman. We are beyond nature. We can do whatever we want, and there's no price to pay. I think there is a price to pay, and ultimately, I think Gaia or the Earth or the source will deal with us if we have this hubris and think we can just do anything we like. You know, we're going to pay for that. I think the only way to go is not, we don't go back to living in caves, but going backwards into the ancient wisdom that we once had and learning to use the technology we have in a symbiotic and holistic way instead of a destructive way. We don't have to go back to sticks and stones, but you know what we're doing is so toxic and destructive, and it's been hidden to a large extent from people. You know, and if you read, you know, the history I have in there, as I was researching the book myself, some of it was shocked me of some of the things I found out about what people have done over the last few centuries. It's just really like a horror story. That's not to say ancient people were perfect and never made any mistakes or never mean to each other. Of course they were, but
Mm.
there was a different understanding about life, and there were limitations on what you could do. It's like some of the people who are in powerful positions now, there's no limit to what they can do. They don't care. They really don't care about the repercussions for humanity or future life. They just want to make money, and
Mm.
you know, money is such a, a futile and sort of trivial
Mm.
thing to base your life
Can't take it with
philosophy
you, you know.
just money when
Mm.
you know life itself is something that should be sacred, and we should be putting that first.
Well, life has
You still
been
there?
here yeah, yeah, you're frozen for me, but I can hear you.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, 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 hello. You're frozen. Uh-oh. Definitely on
Oh,
his
you
end.
back? You're
There
back.
you're back. Yeah, you completely froze. I was going to
Yeah,
say, like,
I lost it completely for a while. Yeah.
yeah, we're not the first kick at the can on this planet. You know, we're I don't know how many civilizations in. I mean, this planet has been inhabited many times,
Mm,
and you know, we come, we go, and the planet rebuilds. I
yeah.
think that you have so many people that are so intent on getting off this planet and seeing what's out there, what's out through the stars. We haven't even explored the deepest depths of our oceans. We don't
Yeah.
have any idea. We have cave systems that are allegedly have their own ecosystems. Well, we know, I won't say allegedly. Go to Cambodia, you'll find one right there. Like there's so much about
Yeah.
this planet that is still wondrous and undiscovered. Why is it that we're so hell bent on destroying it and trying to get off of it?
Yeah. Well, there's two things I think are just uh, indicative of the insanity of modern humans. One is like spending billions on rockets to go to somewhere else when we could be fixing this place. And
Mm.
yeah, as you say, exploring the bottom of the oceans and yeah, all these cave systems and all this incredible stuff that we barely looked at.
Hmm.
I think a tiny percentage of the ocean has been actually explored.
I know.
It's like a couple of percent or something. Uh,
Hmm.
Even like some of the more remote parts of like the north and the south, where
Hmm.
it's really freezing, that haven't been properly explored.
Hmm.
Uh, and then the other thing that we're wasting all this money on is killing each other. You know, I don't know what the spending per, total spending of every country in the world is per year
Mm.
on death and blowing people up. But I'd say it must probably run into like trillions probably.
Well, without a doubt.
Tomorrow we just suddenly decided, right, let's just get rid of all these armies and we're going to close down the defense industry everywhere. You could transform this entire planet in a matter of like a couple of years with all that money.
Mm.
There's no reason for anybody to be starving, anyone to have no water, for anyone to have to live in like a shack,
Mm.
for people to be uneducated, have no access to knowledge, and proper food, water, etc., housing. We've got all these resources, and I'm not saying that we have to become communists. I'm not in favor of
No, no,
that.
no, no. I think it just comes down to control.
Yeah.
Those who control the narrative
Mm.
control the past. You control the future.
Yeah.
You have the money.
Is controlled as well, not
Yeah.
just the present and the future, but yeah,
Yeah.
our perspectives on history are just, based on a school education. They're so poor, so narrow, and such a small amount of information that we're actually taught about the past, about
Mm.
people and how they lived and what their values were and the knowledge that they would have had. That is just sort of, that's like an afterthought, really, isn't it?
Mm. It
That's
is.
a pity.
It is because I think that, there have been many cultures here. If you get back into Atlantis, ancient Lemuria, there's continents beneath the ocean that had cultures on them at one time. Everything, has gone down as everything has shifted around. But you had technology, you had like that. I mean, right now we're like, oh my God, what we would do for this type of technology. Yet these cultures no longer exist. I think in some of the things I've read even about Atlantis, no, again, they ran into this power struggle again, technology, power, you know, I don't think it
Absolutely.
was just an island. I think it was a worldwide. I do think it was a worldwide things because of how and where things have shown up. I do believe the ancients made their way everywhere. They weren't as limited as we primitive folk think.
No, I think they had more advanced travel methods than they credit for. And
Yes.
another interesting thing you mentioned about Atlantis, I read Plato's account, and it does mention about crystals being used in a technological way. And
Yeah.
people, oh, that sounds so woo-woo and crazy. But what do you think LCD stands for? Liquid crystal display. And silicon
Mhm.
is used in semiconductors, in
Mhm.
transistors, which is the basis of all computers and electrical equipment, like your phone
All
is.
from the planet as well, right?
And like there's new technologies being developed in terms of power production through using crystal technology, and
Mhm.
that's works at the moment, and various other
Mhm.
methods too. But like, people, oh no, using crystals in Atlanta sounds so mad, but like, we're actually already using crystals today in so much of our technology right
Mm.
this very moment, and people don't even know it. They're so ignorant that they don't realize that we use crystals all the time.
It's
Uh,
true. It's
so
true.
it makes me laugh when people sort of so dismissive. But I mean, it's quite possible there was an ancient disaster. I think certainly there was probably an asteroid that hit the sort of ice shelf in, I think, North America. There
Mm.
could have been catastrophic wars in the past. Certainly, there's some ancient texts that, like the Mahabharata, that allude to what's described basically as a nuclear war in the ancient past. Um,
Well,
of
you
course,
see it on some structures. You see like burn marks and
yeah,
really ancient structures, and you see them on, in mountain sides of mountains, and like there's definitely something that happened here, without a doubt.
and you know, sort of silicon dioxide, which is basically sand. When you melt it, it forms like glass, and certain deserts in the world there you find underneath all the sand. What have you got? You've got exactly that, um, which would be indicative like of either a massive explosion or high impact things like a meteor. Could Either of those things could generate that kind of heat and pressure. But well, these things are often being covered up and dismissed, and you've got a history over the last 200 years, particularly, where anything that seemed controversial or that would dispute the narrative that they want, that people in government or whatever at the top echelons of education want to push, it would just be buried, dismissed, got rid of, hidden, just ignored. Now, it struck me as amazing that Globekli Tepe was discovered in 1963. Okay. And when did you hear about it? I only heard about it like 10, 15 years ago, I think. So, like, for like 50 odd years, they just kind of ignored it. I know it wasn't excavated until the 90s, but even that time to now is still like that's what,
I've
uh,
heard they reburied it though.
30 years.
Yeah, but they reburied it and planted trees over top of it.
Yeah, there's bits
That's
of
going to
it.
destroy whatever's there. So what did they find?
Yeah. Well, there's
That
parts, I think they've only excavated about 20% of it, and the other 80% they're going to leave it
yeah.
there.
Well,
And
there's
like,
another like 8 just like it. One they just
yeah,
found in the
yeah,
last 5 to 10 years. It's older.
yeah, they found much older stuff.
Yeah.
And, all these archaeologists who are like very conventional are like freaking out. I mean, some of my work there, I remember talking to an archaeologist about the possibility of ancient shipping, and this guy was just poo-pooing it all and go, "Oh no, it's not possible. They couldn't travel, those distances." And like there
Mhm.
was no willingness to consider the possibility. And there's actual proof that they could. There
Mhm.
is actual, real physical proof in the terms of actual boats. And I think it's might be. I'm trying to think if it was Crete or Cyprus where they found these murals of ships, which they dated from the paint. They dated it back to about 17, 1800 BCE. So we're talking nearly 4,000 years ago. They had
They
these
could have
really
done it.
sophisticated ships, which they actually pictures of them.
Mhm.
And the Egyptians made models which are buried in the tombs of some of the ships that they built, like little miniature versions of them.
There's a giant one right
Yeah,
between the
6,000 years ago, the Sumerians were making pretty good
mm,
ships. I mean,
mhm.
they weren't ocean going back then, but they were pretty good. So, are we really supposed to believe it took like another, 3, 4,000 years before people could make proper boats to get around in? I don't believe that. And that's just one example. There's so many areas of life where we've been told that people couldn't do anything. They weren't able to do X, Y, and Z. It just wasn't possible. And suddenly we leapt forward just like that, you
You
know?
have to look at the different structures and monuments throughout the world. Just pyramids alone
Yeah.
might be shaped a little bit differently when you're looking at, let's say the South American
Mm.
cultures to the Egyptian cultures, and just look at like Bolivia. China doesn't want to talk about their pyramids, but there's lots of them.
Yeah. Why?
There's 2 or 300 just in Egypt. I mean, when you start looking at that and the similarities, how can you say they did not make their way around? Just go to the Grand Canyon. Just look in Arizona. There's a Sphinx in Arizona. There's no missing it. Grand Canyon is said to have one. Like, you start looking at these images and you kind of like going, no, there's just no way they didn't get around.
Yeah.
No
Well, I
way.
mean, of course, there is some stuff that people come up with which is just like pure speculation and a
Of
bit.
course.
But then what happens is, one person comes up with a loony idea, and then so they just dismiss all these theories as rubbish. That everything's rubbish because of one, crackpot who says like, I don't know, something really bizarre and nonsensical. But I
Mm.
mean, if this thing just really purely logically, it's obvious that we're not getting the full story.
Well,
And
how
then
do
when,
you look at a structure? Like, I'll give you an example because we had Deborah Thunderbeat come on. She's in Arizona. She's traveled the world. She's a very respected artist, singer. But she does a tour, which is ancient Egypt in Arizona. And these are structures. It's not like there's something hidden in a cave or anything like that. It is a structure. You look at that, you can clearly see it's a statue or structure of some sort. Like, there's no really missing what it actually is, except maybe missing the point that somebody put it there that would have had some kind of ancient knowledge, or would have at least traveled to the
Yeah.
other side of the world and come back and say, "Oh, I can reconstruct this," which would have been quite a feat. But like the information, I guess, is where I'm going with this. It was being passed around somehow.
Yeah. Well, there's an interesting kind of correspondence which seems to be overlooked in the past, which people are looking into more, which is sound. The
Yeah.
uh,
Mhm.
inside the pyramids, the sound in various safe sites, including some places like up up uh, up in Newgrange in County
Mhm.
Ireland,
Mhm.
and it would appear that the ancient Druids had uh, particular knowledge in reference to sound, and certainly musical instruments are very important in ancient Egyptian culture, in China, and in Ireland too. In fact, one of the most amazing things I could believe was just really shocking. This Proto-Chinese script, which is about 8,000 years old, right? They found these flutes that they'd made, perfect tune of flutes.
Hmm.
So 8,000 years ago, these Chinese people were playing flutes and writing, and that's all kind of covered up. And then, like you say about the pyramids, why is it they won't let anyone look at them? What are they afraid of people finding out?
Mm. Mm.
Again, a lot of Egyptian stuff, Sumerian stuff, um, very very closely guarded, um, and it just seemed that there is a sort of almost a conspiracy to stop people actually kind of digging into the past too much, because they might find something that doesn't really um, doesn't really support the sort of narrative that they keep pushing on us all the time. I mean, look at the resistance to Harold Schmidt and uh, Goblet Tepe. I think I got the first name wrong actually. But anyway, he's dead now, but his work initially was not supported, and over time, obviously, it became a big thing. The Turkish government got behind him on all this. But I mean, if you run into resistance, I mean, imagine, if you found a site, say in the United States, and it happened to be like 15,000 years old, and the CIA or whatever, the Smithsonian this information of what you found. Do you think that would become public this year or next year or in 10 years or more like in 50 years? Probably, wouldn't it?
There
You know?
there are people, I think if you're not part of academia, there are people who have found discoveries. There's a lot of people, I know of a couple in the United States which have kept their findings very quiet. Nobody knows about them because they don't want people like the Smithsonian coming on to their property and trying to fudge things up. They know what they have. They have pre-Columbian structures there. They know there's something very substantial about what they have found. But when you have organizations, every day people find things all the time. I could give you examples of just people I know, like again, even in England, where something was found. And as soon as the powers that be got a hold of that information, that person went quiet. So, I think we have to factor in
Yeah.
that, I'll use Gobekli Tepe. So there's an organization which are part of a three-letter organization out of Germany or Austria right now that's sort of, I don't want to flag the show, but right
Yeah.
now there's a lot of people like we don't want to be a part of this organization. This organization has a subdivision that donates a lot of money to different projects every year, humanitarian, and one of them is archaeology. And they got a hold of some sort of a 10-year or 15-year thing with Gobekli Tepe, donated a lot of money. They reburied it. So if you're saying there's 80% that is still yet to be excavated, why would you bury the other 20% for future archaeologists and then put a forest on it? There's all kinds of trees over it now. The roots of those trees will grow and destroy whatever's underneath.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. Maybe something
Mhm.
will be in the future to remove that. But like, there's a place called Karahan Tepe where they're going to put a big old roof on top of that. I've actually been there, and
Mhm.
they've top of the hill, and they've excavated more stuff, incredible stuff since.
Mm-hmm.
And there's sites like you say down the road which are even older.
Mm-hmm.
Carhen be older than Göbekli Tepe, and further down the road again, there's even more. Like
Yeah.
they've saying, oh, there's no such thing as like advanced pottery like 10,000 plus years ago. So what did they find? That's exactly what they found, and jewelry, really complicated jewelry going back to 12,000 years plus. And I was in Japan, I think it was last year, and they're going, oh, ancient peoples couldn't make pottery, or they were like, oh, cave people. Turns out the ancient Japanese culture were making like really advanced pottery like 8, 10,000 years ago. So all this narrative, like, oh, we were pretty much savages, and about 4,000 years ago, ish, maybe 4,500 years ago, we suddenly got writing and the wheel, and we started making proper clay pots, which were nice, and discovered jewelry and art and design, and that's all lies. It's all such utter uh,
Mm.
codology and rubbish. You know,
Mm.
uh,
Yeah.
we have had abilities as humans for a lot longer than we've been told.
It's just controlling a narrative. They don't want you to know what we come from.
Mm.
You know,
I grew up
they.
thinking that we were like savage, like you know, probably much before Christianity, and like that a few thousand years ago we were going around in animal skins grunting. Probably most people, grew up thinking that, and then you get older, and
Mm.
the more and more you look, you realize that that's just this ridiculous version of history that we're being sold, which is
Mm.
so it's so dishonest.
But
Um,
history has a way of repeating itself. So you start seeing, even books and monuments being taken down or being removed.
yeah,
Because we just are not supposed to know where we come from. And every time they try to change or do a reset or change a narrative, stuff starts disappearing. I think you can get into the whole Mandela effect with that. Well,
yeah,
didn't this say this? No, it never said that. No,
yeah.
I'm pretty sure I remember it saying this, with respects to books, for example, how things have just been tweaked.
Well, it's an old technique that was being used in Ireland, to destroy the Irish language, destroy the culture. St.
Mm.
Patrick, you mentioned, burned like 400 odd pagan books. You look at what happened in Canada and North America,
Mm-hmm.
um, attempting to destroy the indigenous people and, completely, rewrite their culture as if it didn't exist.
Mm.
Uh, it's the same in all over the world. You've got different empires that have done this over and over again, sort of erasing people's history and sort of just
Mm-hmm.
to destroy them. And it's happened in every continent. You know, there's
Mm.
I think it's the Tangut people in China, the Mongols, the Genghis Khan really didn't like them. He got treated very badly when he was a prisoner there, and he just
Mm.
erased the entire nation, erased it. And all that's left is one monastery that he promised not to destroy, and some of the tombs of the rulers. Everything else is gone, and nothing about them. Their language, their culture, their history, their clothing, everything is gone. It's
Mm.
just a little bit of archaeology.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the first time it happened. It's happened since, and it's happened many times in the past. I just hope it doesn't ever happen again, because I think we need to evolve beyond this kind of brutality. And it's getting a bit late in the day for that kind of,
Mm-hmm.
we are in the last chance saloon pretty much, I think, as a human society that I
Mm-hmm.
think pretty much sick of us at this stage and wants us to change or just clear off. You know,
I'm
we
all for change if it
change.
if it benefits all, not just a few.
Yeah,
Because you have people who say these are the changes that are coming for you little people, but the lifestyle doesn't change for those implementing the conditions,
no,
and that's not right either. Because if these are the people who are in control of destroying the planet, for the good of new vehicles and so on and so forth, which is harder on the environment than the
Yeah,
old-fashioned way. Like, there are just things that need to happen, but there are things that you need to factor in that don't necessarily work any better for the planet. And in
yeah.
the end, that doesn't work out so well for those inhabiting the planet, because the planet will heal herself. She
It will.
always does,
It was
long
the
after we're gone.
if we blow ourselves up or annihilate ourselves. There was a really interesting French, very short documentary about this, where they kind of said, "What happens if we all died tomorrow? All the nuclear power stations would blow up, and the place would be full of radiation. But after about 30,000 years, the Earth would have completely regenerated, and it'd be like we were never here.
Mhm.
So, even if we did nuke the place, the world would continue. It would recover. It'd just be us that's gone. And like, I think we're almost like suicidal. And I think there's a lack of spiritual underpinning to modern society is the real fundamental problem. eh,
Mhm.
That we've lost our way. We've lost our spiritual direction. I think we have to refine that as a species.
I
Um,
I agree. I think we need to, like, Kathy says, somewhat like go back to the horse and buggy, so to speak. Go back to basics. But we
mm,
do need to get back in touch with our higher selves, with our creator. And it doesn't mean you have to be in an institution, you know, so to speak. You can find that within yourself, and you get that by going back to nature. It becomes natural at this point. I
yeah,
guess we've sort of lost a natural way. Everything's become synthetic. I laugh when I see these new virtual glasses, or you can go pay to have a virtual experience of walking in a forest. I'm perplexed. I'm like, why don't you just go walk in a forest? Now I
yeah,
get if you are in a what I call the concrete urban jungle, you're in the cities and there's no forest around. I get it. It is the next best thing. But when you're sitting there and you have
mm,
access, it's kind of crazy. Why don't you just go get the real experience?
yeah. Well, the best option is actually just move out of the city and go and live somewhere where there's nature. But like,
Hmm.
the first time it was a few years back now that for the first time ever in human history, more than half of humanity was is living in an urban environment. That had never happened up till like I think it's a 3 or 4 years ago that it happened. You know,
Hmm.
it's been climbing obviously, and then it passed the 50%.
And then the fires happen to push
Yeah,
everybody back in.
yeah. Well, I mean,
Just
I
saying, I'll leave that right there.
yeah. Well, people that know about that will get that. So we don't need to dwell on that one. Yeah, but there
Yeah.
is definitely a push towards urbanization of everything. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I suppose we have a choice between like heaven and hell, really, because not in just a spiritual sense, but in a literal sense, because we could have a dystopian future where everyone has no freedom, where everything is done by robots, where there's nobody living in the countryside, that's all done by robots, and they farm, and we all herded off to the middle of a 15-minute city, and we're stuck in that, and we've no choices. Or, that's the hell. And the heaven is like a world with actual real freedom, with real nature, where we live in a symbiotic way with the world that's around us. That would be heaven. I do not want to live in this, world of futurism. I'm not anti technology per se, but you can just know that if it's possible to abuse like AI, to abuse robotics, to abuse all this tech that we're coming up with, that there's somebody out there with a lot of money who will subvert it and pervert it and use it just to tread people down into the dirt all that much more. So
It's
I'm thinking about,
happening. Yeah.
we need ethics. We need people to run this world who actually care, who actually are ethical people, who who care about humanity and the world and actually have a sort of spiritual center, some kind of spiritual compass. I feel like so many of these people have no compass whatsoever. They're just purely out for greed, self-serving. They don't have any grounding in spiritual life, or if they do, whatever beliefs they have are so twisted and perverted that they have lost all sense of humanity and empathy. And
It's
I don't
sad
want
because
that. I
you
just do.
you need to have that balance.
Yeah, we've got to change this world ourselves, really, because I think we've got past the point where we can wait for things to change, wait for God to change and wake up. They're not going to. I think
Mm.
there was a guy called Buckminster Fuller, with a very odd name, who wrote years and years ago. He was sort of an engineer, but also a bit of a philosopher. He says, you can't wait for a system to fall down. You have to build a new one so that the old system becomes irrelevant. And that's basically what we need to do. We need to create a new paradigm, a new world, a new way of looking at things that will make these people irrelevant. That, this kind of self serving and sort of corrupt way of uh, running the world will just not be even relevant anymore. And they'll just have to just disappear. And without,
I agree, but what happens when you're dealing with frequency with those technologies, and those frequencies are on every corner, and you can just, hike that up a little bit, and then it changes what happens, because we are energy,
yeah,
water
well,
and energy, both of which can be manipulated by frequency.
there is a lot of manipulation going on. And,
Yeah.
they're trying harder and harder. But I mean, back in the day, the Roman times, they had a fella that came out into the square and read the news out to people from a scroll. And then it
Yes.
evolved to like a guy ringing a bell. And
Yeah. I remember that.
it's
Not that
funny,
it was there. Well, I might have been, but oh, I
you
do
know,
remember.
they go,
Yeah.
oh yay, this is the news of the
Yeah.
week. And now it's moved on to like, we've got 5 and 6G coming down the road and super fast everything and instantaneous blah blah. But
Mm.
ultimately, all these things have been about controlling people, not about informing us. It's about giving you a version of reality so that you will conform. And I
Mm.
think people are waking up to that. They're realizing that actually I'm just being fed lies, that the real truth is out there for us to find in, like you say, going inwards, but also going outwards and, meeting other people, looking at the true history of things and
Mm.
actually connecting with that, so that we can actually find something authentic instead of something that's fake. Because I think there's an increasing sense that what they're offering us, what's being offered on a plate to us all the time, is just fakery. It's not authentic. It doesn't have any spirit. It has nothing underpinning. There's no ethical kind of underpinning at all. It's just so shallow and materialistic and just kind of ultimately worthless.
Mm.
If we are spiritual beings, if we are capable of so much, then they're just offering us crumbs which are meaningless, really.
Mm.
Um,
But
you
that's where you have to go into yourself, or take a moment, whether I mean, being out of the complete, city life where you're affected by everything that's going on.
yeah,
You can, it's just, I always say, even just throw YouTube on, listen to some binaural beats, just try to disappear in your mind for a little while. It's just, there's some things that can be taken from you, there's some things that can't. So, that's something you have to be diligent with, to you evolve any way you can. Because in
yeah,
all the research that I've done, because I've been researching many things for the last 2 decades, especially working in media and helping consultation, creation of shows, things like that. I've learned, just even talking to guests who have come on in the last, 6 years of the show, it's we've really dumbed we're so dumbed down, considering you can go back thousands of years and have evolved, civilizations, which is where technically where we come from.
yeah,
Around the world, you have these civilizations who were just so much, I'll say there was a lot of barbarian, stuff in there as well, but there was just a lot of technology. There was just a lot of culture, spirituality. And you look at those who came before us, who even had the knowledge of the stars and sky people. And you read about this throughout all of these ancient places. Like they didn't necessarily fear, a lot of these other ethereal beings, or they're very in tune with them.
yeah. We've been taught to fear that.
Mhm.
It's a way of looking at things. And you know, I think that's all beginning to change. I mean, when I was lucky to be able to go around the world in many different places, so I kind of looked into that in some different countries. You've got interesting stories amongst the Aboriginals in Australia and even in the Maoris in New Zealand, and there was another culture that was there before they were as well. So um, they do know that the Polynesians that arrived in New Zealand, that they were making voyages to get there, across the Pacific, maybe not as far as New Zealand, but some of the other islands at around 3,000, 3,500 BCE on, they say on rafts, but I mean, I don't think so. So they get away like thousands of miles on a raft, a simple raft. So I think they built boats which are more sophisticated than they think. And now Easter Island and some of the history there, and they were saying, "Oh, this place is only about 400 or 500 years old," and now they're revising that big time. So I think there's so much there that's sort of up for reevaluation, and I think it's just pointing to the idea that it doesn't have to be this way. There are alternatives, and we've got to a point where we have to demand these alternatives, because where are we going to end up otherwise? It's going to be like you know, uh, like a prison, really, where a certain number of people will be able to do whatever they like, and the rest of us are just going to be like coerced.
What's
And
happening? Yeah, it
that
is. It's
future
happening.
we want to envision. We need to envision something much better, something that is actual real freedom for humanity, and the ability for us to sort of fulfill our potential as not just physical beings, but spiritual beings as well. So I think that's part of a big kind of, I suppose, metaphysical battle, or sort of like you could say between good and evil, light and dark, whatever,
Mm.
that's been raging probably since the beginning of time, but it's very much playing out on this planet right now in, the minority of people who want everything for themselves, and then there's the rest of humanity who just really want to live and have a decent life. That's all what
Mm.
most really want. They're not out to like take over the world or be the boss of everything. They just want to be able to have a decent life for themselves and their family and future generations to come, which isn't much to ask, really, is it?
No, it isn't. And this planet is big enough for everyone,
Mm.
without a doubt. It's just, I think we're entering into the age of technology. If you start looking at astrology and things like that, it's a time of Saturn. Well, Saturn is the god of war, technically speaking, and technology, and that's what we're entering in. And I don't think that it's not going to work, for
Well, it's not
everyone.
all
It
bad.
will work for those who are in control.
And you've got Neptune sort of dipping in and out in this sort of strange way over time. Oh, it's going to be very much a time of huge change and upheavals, I think. But ultimately, I think we are going to make it into this Aquarian age, and there will be a huge change of consciousness. Okay, you've got those who become kicking and screaming to the last second, and I don't know how it's going to work out exactly, but I imagine that people look back on this time as tumultuous and a
Mm.
sort of a watershed moment, like where we sort of you know cross the Rubicon, so to speak, where we can't go back to this sort of primitive and stupid, idiotic and selfish way of living. I hope
Mm.
we get to a point where that it's no longer possible to revert to the sort of savagery and selfishness that we've been plagued with for thousands of years.
It sure is a letdown, when you think about it, for those who came before us and worked so hard to establish so much
Mm.
to assist in evolutions. You go back and you think about the Atlanteans and the ancient Lemurian technology, and people who are just aware, again, mapping the stars long before all the technology was there to do it. I mean, there were artisans back
Yeah.
then, there were creators, there were healers, farmers. Everybody had their place. And then it just seems like in the last 1,000 years, it's just
Yeah.
like, what happened?
Well, you, you
Oh,
mentioned that far back, but you don't even have to go that far back. I
no, you
think
don't.
the oldest poem in the world is about, I think, about something like 4,500 years old, or 5,000 years nearly,
Mm,
written by a Sumerian priestess, and it's quite beautiful. And you look at their culture and the things that they wrote back then,
mhm.
realize they had a very different way of seeing the world, you know,
Yes.
and the ancient Egyptians and various other peoples around the world, and from their oral histories, even, you just realize there's a sort of a different level of empathy and relationship between people and relationship to the earth and all living things. And you compare that with sort of the triviality of so much of the modern world, and you just see how we've descended to such an infantile and ridiculous state of consciousness for many people. And then the hopeful thing is you can see the kickback against that, the desire for something that's real, that's
Mm.
meaningful, and people just thirsting for a new start, something, a chance to actually sort of do something differently that actually maybe will last, because we've been up and down over, like you said, over millennia.
Mm.
It got better, they got worse, they got better again, they got worse again, but we never quite have made it to that point where you could say we've truly evolved to sort of our full potential. We're yet
No,
to
I,
get.
I don't think we've made it over the hump where we've been able to stay there.
No,
We're
unfortunately.
still at the plateau part.
Maybe this is the
Yeah.
time where this is actually going to happen. Where I think we kind of, like you said, it's the last chance saloon. We don't have a lot more chances left to do this. So I think we really got to make it. There's an interesting film, a remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still, and it's got Keanu Reeves as this guy, Cloud. And I
Yes.
think John Cleese that is talking to Klaatu. He's like the scientist, and he says, right, humanity really only shows its worth or reaches full potential when it's pushed to the edge. He's just like he's trying to convince him not to kill us all and wipe us all out because that's what he's come to do.
Mm.
And he says, like, give us that chance. Give us that one last chance to evolve and show you that we could fulfill our potential. Don't just wipe us out. And he manages to convince him. So it's a slightly different ending from the original 50s
It
film,
is.
but it's really
Yes.
quite beautiful. It's just like, yeah, I really think we are at pushed to the edge, and maybe that is what we've needed, to be pushed to the edge to actually finally make the changes that we have to make in order to move into the Aquarian age. I think that's really what this generation and the next generation, that's our job really, is to try and get us over that line
Mm.
and all this flip flopping that we've been doing for centuries and millennia up till now.
Well,
I
I
think
think
we
we
can do it.
we
Yeah,
naturally fear things that we don't understand, and we obviously, as a culture, we the conditioning happens so steadily and so slowly and so consistently that you don't even realize until it's too late that it's happened, and it gets passed down generation to generation. So the
mm,
cycle continues. So we need to break the cycle and get
yeah,
back to where we have to try to remember who we actually are, where we come from. And
mm,
that's been, I think, taken away from us on different levels. But I feel we've come from, they started off talking about the Druids as very advanced,
mm,
advanced in their thinking, to being able to be advisors and healers and spiritualists and strategists, and right, as a perfect example of one culture that could do it all and to be respected enough to advise the people at the highest levels, and
mm,
still managed at some point to slowly just kind of disappear. But we still hanging in there in modern culture. There seems to be a resurgence of
yeah,
that lifestyle and that belief system. And then we've covered the base of, this is where do we veer off track? Where did the train go off the freaking rails? And here we
yeah.
are, and we can't even get that straight anymore.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We reached a point where what went wrong is no longer important. We know it went off the tracks. And when it
Hmm.
happened, really that important. What is really important is we get back on the tracks again. That's really the mission that humanity is facing, is to get that train back on the track. And
Hmm.
all that why and how is no longer relevant. It's like we're, instead of being on the track, we're going for a cliff. We're heading for a cliff, and we're going to go over the cliff. So we got to get the train back on the tracks, otherwise that's it, game over.
Hmm.
I don't think we got that much time left, really. I think we've got maybe a few decades at most to get this right. And I just see there's so many people, so seeing a lot of young people. I think there's always been this thirst amongst young people. Look at the world and how broken it is, and the adult world that's created. Oh well, we've got to do this and we've got to do that, and yeah, it's wrong, but we need money and we need this, and yeah, we don't like all this, but it's just how it is, and we just accept it.
Our money managers aren't very good at
Yeah.
it.
So
So that's a problem.
we get
Yeah.
taught as we get older just to accept it and become part of the system, and
Yeah.
then you get absorbed into it, and then you become an advocate for the system that you hated, and you saw instinctively that it was all wrong. But like, I think there's certainly cultures who felt that this is wrong, and they fought tooth and nail to hang on to what they already valued and not absorb this
Mm.
crazy uh, sort of, pretty much a commercial culture, isn't it? At the root of it all is commercialism.
Mhm.
That is the god. Money is your god, and that's more important. And money and power, and never mind anything else. Uh, they understood this and they fought to keep it. So we can learn a lot from these people,
Well,
and we
I mean,
ourselves.
humanity emulates. It always has.
Yeah, if you look at every country around the world, they have an older culture that was there before.
Mhm.
The people are tapping into that as a way of reconnecting with that understanding, and I think Druidism is part of that, and
Yeah.
there's various other all kinds of cultures, not all across Europe, which has been kind of sanitized by Christianity. South America,
Mhm.
a lot of you had a huge Catholic influence there, and people are kind of waking up to what was there before, and North America as well, obviously too, with the
Mm.
Native Americans and how they managed to survive at all is incredible to me after what happened in the history of the United States and Canada. It's just amazing they're even still there, and like Africa as well.
Mm.
Asia, everywhere you go, across every single country across the world, pretty much, you've had um, some kind of trauma and destruction, and cultures that have either been erased or half
Mm.
forgotten. I mean, now
Yeah.
there's still 5,000 religions in the world, but there used to be a hell of a lot more than that. And there's entire cultures that have just vanished, that no longer exist. But you know that doesn't have to happen anymore. We have a choice. I think we could embrace like a better future, try and learn from it all, kind of resurrect what's still here, remind the past and bring all this back and use it into a future where we've got spirituality and science and technology, alongside each other, sort of welded together in a sort of holistic way of looking at the world,
Mm.
instead of being, a science, money, or on the other side, spirituality and, alternative stuff. I think that all this stuff has to meet somewhere in the middle.
Mhm.
We need all of this. We got two parts of our brain. We got the left and the right side. One part's logic and the other part is emotion and intuition and all that kind of stuff. We got two parts for a reason. It's not, we shouldn't throw one out and keep the other.
Mm.
We need to learn to use our whole selves, our spiritual, physical, emotional selves. Um,
But there's the difference, I think, tapping back into spirituality and realize it's quite different than conditioning and being told what a narrative is. If you
yeah,
reach inside yourself and you explore that, you will find all of that.
yeah,
You
I
know,
believe.
you,
I think Gnosticism is a word that's kind of got connected very much with Christianity, but it doesn't actually mean Christian in itself. It's a part of a particular belief in Christianity, but it's more universal. And Gnosticism is exactly looking inside yourself, that direct connection between you and source, between deity or God, goddess, whatever you want to call it. So, all these intermediaries of like a whole structure of, religions and organizations, when you become a Gnostic, you realize you don't actually need any of that, that you don't even need a book. We can all connect directly with the source if we want to, if we really learn to, if we're thirsty enough to do that, we will eventually. It might take a little practice, but we'll get there. You can get there. And it's not to say that all religions are bad, but ultimately we should all do for ourselves and make our own connection to spirit. And like a lot of these ancient cultures understood that. They had specialist people who did specific tasks, but they weren't the arbiters of everything. They were there for particular events. They weren't there to tell everyone what to do every 5 seconds.
I also think it was pushed or rewritten, maybe in a narrative, like we're not reading what is actually put forward. Like we'll go to Catholicism for a moment, where Christ says the kingdom of God is within you. He didn't say it was a physical place that you're going to go up there and that's it and hang a left and there you are in the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of God is within you.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think one of the most beautiful parts of Christian canon is the Gospel of Thomas, which is not in the Bible, being removed in every single church I can think of. And I think that's actually the most relevant, the most powerful, the most beautiful part of the Bible. And what all of it is basically along the lines of what you just said. It's his
spirituality,
his spiritual teachings about finding meaning. And it goes against this sort of catechism. It goes against this whole narrative that has been created since the like takeover. And I think, well, you could get rid of the rest of it all and just keep the Gospel of Thomas, and that would tell you everything you need to know about how to live your life. And they took it out,
Again, yeah, I think you get into conditioning. I think people who truly have faith will find it, and they will instinctively find it within themselves. They I get with the institutions. You congregate with people of like mind. But I believe that going back to ancient times, through these gatherings were done in forests, still commuting with nature, still having that connection, knowing full well that you're dealing with a whole other energy, a whole other vibration, and you're still getting everything that you would get being within four walls. Without handing over your chunk of your paycheck every week as well. Like there's a lot to be said.
Your individuality, your sovereignty, your power as a person is not just the money over. I mean, there's a lot to be said for gatherings and people being together in communion, sort of just really powerful. But don't believe it should be in a sense where you've just handed over your authority over your own life to somebody on a stage who's like the sole arbiter of the divine, which is essentially what most of these religions end up boiling down to.
Do you think, look, it's because people through conditioning, do you think that it's because they've lost the way, they've lost the knowledge of being able to pull that in naturally?
Happen if say for instance your grandparents had knowledge of how to communicate with the divine, or how to meditate or pray, and sort of connect with all the stuff, and then they were told by somebody, and then your parents learn this, and they go, oh, I know that my mom and dad knew something about the stuff, but I don't know, they didn't teach me, they got killed, and so I don't know it. And then you go, oh, my parents knew something about something, but I don't really know what it was. They didn't even know what had been lost because, the generation before never got taught what they knew. And so then you're like, oh, well, this is how it is. You come to to this building, and there's a person, usually a man, who's going to stand there in funny clothes and tell you what to believe and how to do this and how to do that. And if you want to be spiritual, you have to come here to this place. And by the way, you need to give us a load of money too, and
In
do
some
everything.
cases, yeah.
So
Yeah.
all this, whatever your parents or grandparents might have known, has been gone. It's been disappeared. It leaves you just this one option. So you've forgotten
The
into
oral history, hence why the
all
ancients would
gone.
pass things down through oral history. You would be given that knowledge.
But somehow these things come back. They survive. It's incredible that things that have been erased by various institutions, I'm not going to mention specific religions
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah,
churches, but
yeah.
you'll know the ones that are about erasing everybody else and everyone else's beliefs.
Mm,
Somehow these things do manage to survive. They disappear and they come back. Look, for
mm,
instance, the Dead Sea Scrolls. How long have they been hidden for?
mm,
And suddenly they popped up. And
mm-hmm.
various things of spiritual nature somehow are rediscovered. I mean, who'd have thought Göbekli Tepe would be found? And we know that is a spiritual, religious, and
Mm.
astronomical center, which is about around the whole. It's a religious center. It's a spiritual center. It's not, it's not an ancient
That was
camp.
purposely buried by them as well. Never mind being reburied now. What causes a culture to bury their
Yeah,
own?
wonder, was it buried on purpose for it to be discovered at a later age, or
Hmm.
was it felt that that knowledge was under threat and had to be
Hmm.
preserved by burying it? Who we don't know fully their reasons. There's some interesting theories around that.
Hmm.
The narrative of the stones is connected with the Great Flood.
Hmm.
Uh, there's lots of interpretations. I won't go into it, but I think that it's no accident that this is all coming to light now at the right time when we need to make this massive transition. And people want to regain what was lost, because there is a sense of lack, isn't there? There is a sense of something missing. That you could go and buy like 1,000 pairs of shoes, and there's some boxer guy who's like he's got like 10 Bugattis or whatever, like
Yeah.
unbelievable. Spent all his money on these ridiculous cars that cost like millions and millions. And there was this other guy, he's a footballer. He's going around a broken phone. And he says, "Why come you got like a cracked phone?" "Oh, well, I don't live on a lot of money, but you're a multimillionaire." It turns out he sends all his money back to South America, and he gives all the money that he's earned to like the town. And as look at the difference between these two people. One of them is a boxer, one of them is a footballer, and one is just indulging themselves for their own gain, and the other one is actually trying to transform.
A community.
And he doesn't give a monkeys that he's got a crack in his phone. His
Hmm.
values are about where he came from, his people, his culture, the love for
Hmm.
and all that. I know who I respect out of those two people, you know.
Yeah.
And
It's very easy to fall into the conditioning.
yeah,
You're someone based on your possessions as opposed to your actions.
yeah,
See, like I think again, it's just so backwards.
yeah.
But the great
It's
thing
changed.
about it is we could always come back from something like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's saying it's not over till it's over, and
Yes.
you know, and the only thing you can't recover from is being dead, really. And even then, occasionally people wake up again and they
Yeah.
tell the world about their near-death experiences. But usually you can't come back from being dead. So until the day you die is an opportunity to do something good in the world. Every day is a new chance to do something positive, to change the world. I've seen those interesting bumper stickers going. It says like, "Do random acts of kindness." It says on the back of somebody's bumper, and I think, wow, what an inspirational message just to put that on the back of your car. And like,
Pay it forward. Same
we
idea. Pay it
can
forward.
do amazing stuff if we want to. We every day is that choice to, uh, you know, um, do
Mm.
something to take all of us forward, because I think collectively we have great power, and that's another lie that we've been fed, that we're all just little tiny people and we can't do anything and we're all powerless.
Mm.
And that's a deliberate attempt to separate people, to keep you sort of powerless by thinking that you can't actually change anything, that you can't affect the world in a positive way. But
Mm.
like, I think I'm not sure where it comes from. It might be Sun Tzu, an example of like an arrow, and you can snap one arrow dead easy. But if you get a big bunch of arrows together and you try to snap them, you can't break them. So when you get people, you put people together of like mind who have an intention to do something, you can change the world. And I think we can change things. We will if we desire to do it strongly enough that enough people around the world, you reach this tipping point, this sort of critical mass of people that we go, right, we've had enough of this.
Mm.
Of this, I don't like swearing, but I'm going to say bullshit way of life. It
Yeah.
is bullshit. We've had enough of it, and I think we actually we have to fight, but not in the physical sense of like violence. That never worked before. Look at the Russian Revolution. Look at the French Revolution. You just got more of the same after.
Yes.
So it's a different kind of fight. This is a metaphysical,
Yeah.
spiritual fight instead of a physical fight. We got to beat them that way. We can't win physically by fighting.
You
You
just have
can't.
to evolve yourself. It can't
Yeah,
affect you. It's a lot harder, if you're at a completely different frequency
yeah,
than, the things out
absolutely.
there that feed off that kind of energy. They want you in a bad place or a fearful place.
Yeah, and if you feel isolated, it makes you weak. So I think once we realize our own potential, our own strength, that we can, if we if people can actually find a way to unite against this sort of, it's an atrocity really, what they're kind of sort of push on us, and the sort of bullshit ideology of life. Really, you kind of reject it in your own mind first, but then you have to take that out into the world, which is essentially what magic is like the application of the will to manifest change, to affect the world around you. That's essentially, we're all capable of some kind of magic.
Mm.
um, and even on like the simplest level, you think about, if you go out into the day and you smile at every single person you meet,
Mm.
you will have an effect on them, whether you can see it or not. If you go
And
out and
that
just
that has a ripple effect.
miserable like that, uh, you've got the opposite effect. So
Mm.
if you think about how many people, if you go out somewhere, how many people do you actually see in a day? Not necessarily everyone you speak to, but everyone who you made eye contact with.
Mm.
An entire day, it could be 1,000 people, or it could be more.
Mm.
Smiled at every person. I know it's a very sounds like a trivial, silly example,
No,
but
it
um,
creates that ripple effect. It's an easy
yeah,
way to do that.
energetically you are changing things, and
Mm.
it could be possible that there's somebody walking down the road and they're so feeling miserable, and they're planning to go and jump off a bridge, and you could walk down the road, you see them and you smile at them and say, "Oh, it's a lovely day," and they go, "Yeah, actually, maybe it is. I'm just going to go home." You
Yeah.
wouldn't know that you'd ever affected them, but you could have done something that you've never
Maybe you
even.
planted the seed and that maybe that's all that needs to
uh,
happen,
yeah, I
right?
mean, we can all plant seeds of
Yeah.
positivity, uh, and I think every day is a chance to do something. Um,
Mm.
and I mean, I'm not perfect. I have bad days where I mess up and I'm like eating bad food, or I
Mm.
waste my time, or did something I wasn't happy about. And then I think, well, today wasn't the best days, but tomorrow's another day. Tomorrow I'm going to wake up, the sun will come up, I'll get up and I'm going to try harder, and I'm going to have a better day tomorrow. And I'll
Mm.
make up for whatever mess up I made of today. And
Mm.
usually I go to bed with that intention if I had a bad day. And usually I'd say 99 times out of 100, that actually works. That you don't let it stop you. Setbacks always happen. Life is full of setbacks. You get
It
up,
is. It's part of
try
the
again.
lesson.
You get up the next day and you get back on the horse and you just do it again.
Hmm.
You do it better the next day. And if you can do it better the next day every day,
Mm.
and then you're winning. You're beginning to actually make a mark on the world. And I think when you think about these people when they die, what's really important? Everyone says it's like your friends, your family. the mark of a good person is not how much money they made. It's like all the people that loved
They've
you, missed
impacted.
you,
Yeah.
that you've touched in your life. Um, that is the measure of a good person, not, oh, I got promoted 5 times and I earned
No,
this.
no.
I had such a
You
great
you
car.
you
Here,
want people to whisper your name long after you're gone because that is what will keep your legacy alive. And you have to remember to put one positive thought into the collective consciousness every single day. Over time, that is what goes out there because there's powers that be out there that are doing the opposite.
yeah,
And you
absolutely.
see you see the effects of that. So turn it around and
Yeah,
put something positive out into the collective consciousness every day, several
yeah,
times if you can. Put it
yeah.
out there and see
I
what
don't
comes back to you.
holiday, do they? The bad guys are on full time. They're not taking
This is
days off.
true. It's true.
If we want to change the world, we've got to actually proactively go out there and do good things.
Do
Try and
good
help
things.
people. Try and
Yes.
help ourselves. And the amazing thing is actually I found doing good things for other people actually makes you feel good.
Hmm.
It's actually a far more of a buzz than like getting like a new toy or whatever.
Hmm.
Actually, doing something that helps someone's life and
Hmm.
seeing what it does, how it can transform things for people. That's really a powerful thing to receive. They're
Leave,
just
leave the
doing it.
world a better place than how you found it, preferably because you were part of it and you left your mark. Pay it
We
forward.
all, we all have to be part of that. And I think if we all, that realization that you're here to do what you have to
Mm-hmm.
do, you just better get on and do it.
Mm-hmm.
We will change things.
Mm-hmm.
We,
I
it's not
agree.
always easy, but like I said, you get up the next day and you get back on the horse. You do it
Mm-hmm.
again. You don't, you don't give up, and that's I think what ultimately is going to lead us all to fulfillment and happiness, and a better
And not
future.
end up like our predecessors that we've been talking about this whole show. We don't want to be like that. We want to keep going. We want to keep evolving.
Yeah, and I think we can do it. It's just a matter of really being focused. And as you
Mhm.
said, um, there's like a seesaw that's been going on, and we want to swing the seesaw in the right direction, and that's down to us actually being
Mm.
proactive and doing it and actually making it happen. And we can do it. Um, and
It's
I
all
think,
mindset and intention. If you tell
yeah, I think
yourself you
that's
can do
why
it and
they tell
believe
us
it, yeah,
that
yeah.
magic doesn't work and that we're all alone and that we can't do anything, we're powerless. They're telling us that because they know that the opposite is actually true. That
Mm.
if we do have that focus, that good intention, uh, and we're able to sort of repeat that over and over and sort of work together and see the positivity, the good in the world, that we can actually change things. And that's if they're terrified that we're going to do that we are collectively going to
Well,
change.
it's why so much effort has been put into the conditioning. I agree with you 100%. We ourselves are powerful machines. We're
Mm,
miracles of life, we're creation. So
yeah,
why so much effort in conditioning and dumbing down unless there was a fear that we as a collective could be very powerful? I think you
totally.
nailed it right there.
Yeah, it is down to their fear that they
Yeah.
are less powerful than everybody else who actually wants something better, and they know that, and that's why they have done exactly that. Why they put so much effort into making us feel isolated, inferior, powerless, because they know um, that they're actually incredibly vulnerable to this. And like collective consciousness has enormous power if only we could actually do it. It's like, did you ever come across the story? As an Irish guy called Jonathan Swift wrote a book called Gulliver's Travels, right?
Yes.
And his metaphor is like this giant that's tied up on the beach with Lilliputians, these tiny little people. But like the public is like this giant who's lying down on the sand, being tied down by these little ropes by all these very important Lilliputians, you know. who like work in different organizations, usually with 3 letters and what have you. And you're lying there thinking, oh my God. But actually what happens, the giant just gets up and just all the ropes fall away and the little people are like, scattered. As collectively, we actually like that. That if only we realized the power that we do have as collective humanity, they'd just be these tiny little people that are just brushed out of the way, and we tackle those ropes. But it requires an understanding. It requires a knowledge that we could do this. This world could be an amazing place if only we actually got up off the ground and just made it happen. So I think we're halfway there. We're kind of almost realized that we're kind of straining at the ropes now, like this big giant. It's beginning to wake up, and the Lilliputians are all absolutely crapping themselves.
We're going back. That's it.
Starting to fall away. The scales of our eyes, and they are in terror that we are going to just suddenly just no longer accept it.
Have faith. Put it out there and just be the best you could be, because that goes against many narratives. But this is a really awesome show. Boy, did it go into a really interesting direction, which everybody was into. But I love it. I love it because it just shows where part of where we came from and where we're going and what we can do for ourselves to get there. So thank you for joining me. It's just
been great.
Yeah. So, okay. Now tell us real quick, your books, where can they find it? I've got your website up.
You can get that at that site, which are all signed copies, but I mean, a bit expensive for places like Australia and Canada and America. The postage is quite a lot. So you can find all these on local sites. Like, I'm not going to give a mention to the big one. There's one particular big seller where you get them all. But I'd suggest try some smaller websites, some more local if you can. Might you be able to get them pretty much the same prices, and the postage is a lot less. Like .ca, .aus I think for Australia, and .com for America.
Yes.
But I mean, I try not to support like people that send big rockets.
Support the author.
Too much,
That's what you want to do.
Small shops, local bookshops, as much as possible. But I mean, if you can't get it ordered in a local bookshop, you will find them all online. And obviously at my own website too. But I'm very much for supporting authors, not just me, but anybody that writes a book. In the most cases, through publishers, you really don't get very much money. And if you support the person that's written things at their own website, the same with music as well. You go to a band's website and buy it, the CD or whatever, direct from them. They usually do, because there's a whole big machine around publishing, music industry, even the art world.
Oh, absolutely. Always go to the source, I always say. But I want to thank everybody in the chat room as well for spending your afternoon on this side of the world, evening on Luke's side of the world. You guys just make it that much more interesting. Tomorrow night, please tune into The Outer Realm. Dave Benison comes back in, historian from Historical Niagara. Will come back for part 2. There's so much more information that he wants to share. It's tourist season in the Niagara region, so it's good to know where some of these places are. Very historic, mind you. Thursday night, my other dear friend John Semple joins me, and he's going to be back, and we're going to be talking about sky people, the similarities, much like what Luke and I have been doing on a different level, but the similarities of all these experiences through all of these, ancient cultures, ancient people, and our Indigenous people, oral history, that sort of thing. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So until then, thank you guys all. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, United Public Radio, 105.3, 107.7 FM. And we'll see you all tomorrow evening.